Before Starbucks became a global symbol of comfort and community, there was a boy who knew nothing about comfort at all. Howard Schultz grew up in the rough neighborhoods of Brooklyn, New York, in a world where dreams felt like a luxury and struggle was the only constant. His family lived in a government housing project, where walls were thin, winters were cold, and opportunities were scarce. His father worked as a delivery driver, a hard, honest job, but without benefits or security. One icy morning changed everything. His father slipped, broke his hip, and lost his job. No insurance, no compensation, no dignity. Howard was only 7, but he watched his father sit in silence, defeated by a system that treated him as invisible. That image never left him. It was not just pain, it was transformation. In that moment, a seed was planted deep inside him. If I ever build something, I will build it differently. I will build it with heart. Howard's childhood was a mix of embarrassment and determination. He wore hand-me-down clothes, avoided inviting friends home, and dreamed of escaping the invisible cage of poverty. But instead of breaking him, hardship became his teacher. It taught him empathy, resilience, and the hunger to rise. He didn't know how or when, but he made a silent promise to himself to build a life that honored people like his father. That promise, born from pain, would one day fuel the creation of one of the most loved brands on earth. After college, Howard Schultz began his career as a salesman at Xerox, one of the best training grounds for young professionals at the time. He learned discipline, presentation, and persuasion. But deep down, he wanted something more meaningful than a paycheck. He wanted to belong to a company that cared about people and product, not just profit. One day, while working for a small kitchenware company, Howard noticed something unusual. There was a tiny coffee business in Seattle that kept buying more coffee machines than any other client. Its name? Starbucks. Back then, Starbucks had only 4 stores. It didn't serve coffee drinks, didn't have cozy chairs or music. It simply sold high-quality beans and equipment. But the culture inside those few stores was different. The people there cared. They spoke about coffee like it was art. They believed in authenticity. Howard was intrigued. He decided to fly to Seattle to see it for himself. The moment he walked in, he felt something he couldn't explain. The aroma, the passion of the staff, the simplicity, it all drew him in. There was something magical about Starbucks, he later said. I saw more than coffee. I saw community. Soon after he joined the company as director of retail operations and marketing, he wasn't the founder. He wasn't rich. But what he carried inside was more valuable vision. Then came 1983, the year that changed everything. Starbucks sent Howard to Italy for a trade show. What was supposed to be a short business trip became the turning point of his life. As he walked through the streets of Milan, he noticed something extraordinary. On almost every corner, there was an espresso bar, full of life, laughter, and conversation. People weren't rushing through caffeine fixes. They were connecting. The barista knew every customer's name. The coffee wasn't just a drink. It was a ritual, a moment of belonging. Howard stood there in awe. For him, it wasn't about the espresso, it was about humanity. This, he thought, is what America doesn't have. We don't have this feeling, this connection. He realized that coffee could be a bridge, not just a beverage, but a way to bring warmth and community to everyday life. When he returned to Seattle, he was bursting with excitement. He went straight to the Starbucks founders, Jerry Baldwin, Zev Siegel, and Gordon Bowker, and shared his dream. We need to open coffee bars. Let people drink the coffee here. Let's bring the Italian espresso culture to America. He expected applause. He got silence. The founders looked at each other and then at him. Finally, they said no. That's not who we are. We sell beans, not cups. We don't want to run coffee bars. Howard was stunned. He had just seen the future, and his own company didn't believe in it. They thought Americans would never pay $2 or $3 for a cup of coffee. They thought it was a fantasy. For days, Howard couldn't shake the disappointment. He loved Starbucks, but his dream was bigger. He couldn't let it die in that conference room. One night, he told his wife, "If they won't do it, I will." It was a terrifying thought. He didn't come from money. He had no investors waiting. But he had conviction, And sometimes conviction is more powerful than capital. In 1985, Howard made the most painful decision of his career. He left Starbucks. With no certainty and no safety net, he set out to build the dream the world said would fail. He called his new company Il Giornale, named after an Italian newspaper that represented the culture he had fallen in love with. Raising money was brutal. He pitched his idea hundreds of times, and hundreds of times he heard the same words. No one will pay $3 for coffee. You're crazy. He was rejected 217 times. Each no cut deeper, but none were strong enough to stop him. Howard once said, "Every time someone said no, I imagined my father sitting on that couch, hurt, unseen, defeated. And I told myself I'm not giving up. Not again." Finally, after months of endless rejection, 30 investors said yes. He raised $400,000, just enough to open his first store in Seattle. From the moment Il Giornale opened, something magical happened. Italian music played softly in the background. Baristas remembered customers' names. People smiled. They stayed longer. They talked. They felt something new connection. And that was exactly what Howard had dreamed of. It wasn't just coffee anymore. It was a feeling. The store became an instant success. The skeptics were wrong. People loved the atmosphere, the humanity, the experience. Coffee wasn't a commodity anymore. It was a culture. But life has a funny way of circling back. While Il Giornale was thriving, the original Starbucks founders decided they wanted to sell the company. They were ready to move on. And suddenly, the same brand that had once rejected Howard's dream was up for sale. For Howard, it wasn't just a business opportunity. It was destiny. But the price was steep: $3. $8 million, nearly $10 million in today's money. For a man who had just scraped together $400,000, it felt impossible. Yet once again, he refused to quit. He pitched investors all over again, not for coffee, but for belief. "This is my life's purpose," he said. "I'm not just building a company. I'm building a dream for people." And once again, faith met effort. He raised the money. In 1987, at the age of 34, Howard Schultz bought Starbucks. He didn't just buy a company. He brought back his dream. When Howard Schultz officially bought Starbucks in 1987, it wasn't the glamorous deal that people imagine today. Starbucks was still small, just 6 stores, a tiny roasting plant, and a confused identity. It didn't even sell coffee to drink. There were no cappuccinos, no lattes, no caramel drizzle, and definitely no Wi-Fi. What Howard had purchased wasn't a gold mine. It was a blank canvas. But that was exactly what he wanted. A blank canvas meant he could finally paint his vision without permission. Howard's dream was simple but radical. Starbucks would no longer just sell coffee beans. It would sell a feeling, a sense of belonging, warmth, and connection. He believed that in a busy, lonely world, people needed a third place, a place that wasn't home and wasn't work, but still felt like both. He began rebuilding Starbucks from the ground up. Every detail mattered. The smell, when you walked in, the lighting above the counter, the music in the background, each was designed to make you feel comfortable and seen. "We're not in the coffee business serving people," he said. "We're in the people business serving coffee." He renamed employees partners, not workers. Every partner, even part-timers, received healthcare benefits and stock options. This was unheard of in America at the time. People thought he was crazy. Why give benefits to baristas? They asked. Howard's answer was simple. Because if we take care of our people, they will take care of our customers. And it worked. Customers could feel the difference. They weren't being rushed. They were being welcomed. Baristas remembered names, smiled genuinely, and wrote your name on your cup, a small gesture that made people feel special. Starbucks became a place where you didn't just buy a drink, you felt like you belonged. Between 1987 and 1992, Howard grew Starbucks from 6 stores to 165 stores across major cities like Chicago, Vancouver, and New York. But his growth wasn't reckless. Every location was chosen carefully, every design intentional. He refused to franchise because he wanted to control the experience. "We're not building fast," he said. "We're building forever." Before Starbucks, most Americans didn't even know what latte or espresso meant. Howard changed that. He trained baristas to educate customers patiently. Slowly, people began using words like macchiato and frappuccino with pride. Coffee became a culture, and Starbucks became the teacher. By the early 1990s, Starbucks wasn't just a company, it was a movement. Holding a Starbucks cup became a subtle status symbol. It said, "I care about quality. I take time for myself." Howard had done what few business leaders ever achieve. He made coffee emotional. In 1992, Starbucks went public on the Nasdaq Stock Exchange. The ticker symbol was SBUCKS, and the initial price was $17 per share. On that day, the same man who had once been rejected 217 times now watched Wall Street fight to own a piece of his dream. The IPO was a success, and suddenly Starbucks had the financial power to expand faster than ever before. But even success couldn't dull Howard's obsession with culture. He constantly reminded his team, "Growth for growth's sake is dangerous. We must protect the soul of Starbucks." Then came 1994, the year of the accidental invention. In a small Starbucks in Santa Monica, baristas started experimenting. Customers had been asking for something cold, something fun. So the baristas blended espresso with ice milk and chocolate syrup. They served it with whipped cream and called it Frappuccino. When Howard heard about it, he didn't scold them for breaking rules. He tasted it and smiled. "This," he said, "is brilliant." Instead of dismissing creativity, he celebrated it. The Frappuccino became a national phenomenon, earning more than $50 million in its first year alone. It was a reminder of why Starbucks was special. Innovation came from the ground up. Every partner had permission to dream. By the mid-1990s, Starbucks was ready to go global. Howard looked beyond America and saw a world craving the same sense of comfort and connection. His first international target was Tokyo, Japan. It was a bold choice. No American coffee chain had ever succeeded there. But Japan, with its love for ritual and aesthetics, was a perfect match. In 1996, the first Starbucks opened in Tokyo. The response was overwhelming. People lined up outside. For them, Starbucks wasn't just a cafe. It was a window into a new modern lifestyle. It became a place where East met West, tradition met trend. From there, expansion exploded. Starbucks entered the UK, China, Singapore, South Korea, Germany, and dozens of other countries. By the end of the 1992, Starbucks had over 2,500 stores in more than 20 countries and annual revenue exceeding $1 billion. Howard Schultz, the boy who once couldn't afford to buy a cup of coffee, was now leading one of the most loved brands on earth. His net worth passed $100 million, but what mattered more to him was what the brand represented. To millions, Starbucks meant more than caffeine. It was comfort, connection, and community, a space to pause in a chaotic world. But every dream carries a shadow. As Starbucks grew bigger, the intimacy that made it special began to fade. Some stores felt cold and robotic. Others were overcrowded and noisy. The warm hum of community was being replaced by corporate routine, Howard noticed. He said, "I didn't want to build the next McDonald's. I wanted to build something meaningful." Yet by the late 1990s, Wall Street's expectations were growing louder. Investors wanted more stores, more profits, more everything. The tug of war between heart and hustle had begun. By 2000, Starbucks had become a global giant, and Howard was exhausted. He had spent almost 2 decades building the company from nothing. So he made a shocking decision. He stepped down as CEO. "I've taken the company as far as I can," he said. "Now it's time for someone else to take it higher." He stayed on as chairman, but the day-to-day leadership passed to others. Under new management, Starbucks continued to grow faster than ever. The numbers looked great, but something invisible was slipping away. The very soul Howard had built was starting to fade. But as the company grew from hundreds to thousands of stores, something began to change. The warmth that had made Starbucks so special started to cool. Stores looked the same, sounded the same, smelled the same. They were efficient, clean, and profitable, but they felt less human. The personal connection that Howard had fought so hard to build was slowly slipping away. At first, the numbers looked great. Sales were up, stock prices were strong, and investors were thrilled. But Howard could sense that something invisible was breaking. He would walk into stores and see tired baristas, rushed customers, and the soft hum of music replaced by mechanical noise. The third place he had once dreamed of, that feeling of community between home and work, was disappearing. And then came the storm. In 2007 and 2008, the world was hit by a global financial crisis. Suddenly, millions of people lost their jobs. Families were cutting expenses, and that $4 latte started to look like an unnecessary luxury. Starbucks, once seen as modern and essential, became a symbol of excess. The company began closing stores, hundreds of them. The stock price collapsed by more than 80%. Inside the company, morale was low. Customers were disappearing. Critics said Starbucks had lost its magic. And Howard Schultz, now chairman, no longer CEO, watched in heartbreak. "I walked into some stores," he later said, "and I didn't recognize them. They were busy, but the soul was gone." Then came a call from the board of directors. "Howard, we need you back." In January 2008, Howard Schultz returned as CEO, not to celebrate success, but to save a dream that was dying. At 54 years old, he walked back into the battlefield he had once conquered. But this time, it was harder. The economy was collapsing, competitors were growing, and even loyal customers had stopped believing. Still, Howard came back with fire in his eyes. He gathered his top team and said one sentence that would define his comeback. "We are not in the coffee business serving people. We are in the people business serving coffee, and we've forgotten that." It wasn't just a speech. It was a declaration of war, not against competitors, but against complacency. Howard began making bold, even painful decisions. He closed 900 stores around the world, not because they weren't profitable, but because they didn't represent the soul of Starbucks anymore. He laid off thousands of employees, decisions that broke his heart, but he knew survival required sacrifice. He even cut his own salary to just $1 that year, sending a message: "This isn't about me. This is about saving us." But perhaps his most radical move was what happened next. Howard announced that all 7,000 Starbucks stores in the U.S. would close for one day. Every single one. It cost the company millions in lost revenue. People thought he had lost his mind. But Howard saw it differently. He called it a return to excellence. That day, every barista from Seattle to Miami went through retraining. Not just in how to make espresso, but in how to make people feel again. Howard said, "We're not just fixing our technique, we're bringing back pride." And it worked. Slowly the energy began to shift. The smell of real coffee returned. The music felt calmer, the smiles more genuine. Starbucks wasn't just serving drinks again, it was serving warmth. Howard also began reinventing Starbucks for a new era. He introduced free Wi-Fi in every store, a simple move that turned Starbucks into the world's largest unofficial office. He launched mobile ordering and the Starbucks Rewards app, allowing customers to order ahead and earn points. That app later became one of the most successful loyalty programs in America, used by millions every day. But Howard didn't just want to restore profits. He wanted to restore purpose. He recommitted the company to ethical sourcing, partnering directly with coffee farmers to ensure they were paid fairly. He expanded the company's support for small farmers in Latin America and Africa. Starbucks began investing in sustainability, recycling, and reducing waste. He also turned Starbucks into a force for social good. He hired military veterans, offered free college education to employees, and created job programs for refugees and disadvantaged youth. "Success is empty," he said, "if you're not lifting others with you." By 2010, the results spoke louder than words. Starbucks was alive again. Revenue climbed back to nearly $12 billion. The stock price tripled. Customers returned. Employees, or partners as Howard insisted on calling them, rediscovered their pride. But most importantly, the feeling came back. You could walk into a Starbucks, Smell the coffee, hear the soft music, see a barista smile, and feel human again. The magic that had once vanished was now back stronger than ever. Howard would visit stores quietly without announcing himself. In one Brooklyn store, not far from where he grew up, he watched a young barista hand a coffee to an elderly man and say, "This one's on me today, sir. You always brighten our day." Howard smiled. That was it. That was the heart of Starbucks. Not the profits, not the stock price, but the connection. By 2017, Starbucks had over 25,000 stores in more than 70 countries, with a market value of over $80 billion. Howard had taken a company that sold beans and turned it into a brand that sold belonging. When he finally stepped down again, this time on his own terms, he said, "I didn't build the biggest coffee company. I built the most human." And maybe in a world that often forgets what really matters, that was the greatest accomplishment of all. By 2017, Starbucks had become a global empire, 25,000 stores, across more than 70 countries, hundreds of thousands of employees, and one of the most recognizable brands on the planet. But for Howard Schultz, it was never just about numbers. It was about what those numbers meant. People served, dreams built, dignity restored. He often said, "We are not building stores, we are building human connections." And those connections were everywhere. From Tokyo to Toronto, from London to Lima, people walked into Starbucks not just for caffeine, but for comfort. They sat down, opened their laptops, read, laughed, and talked, and somewhere in the background, Howard's vision quietly lived on. But behind every success story lies a deeper reason. For Howard, that reason was his father. When he was 7 years old, he had watched his father, a delivery driver, break his hip on an icy morning and lose everything. No insurance, no job, no respect. Howard never forgot the image of his father sitting on the couch, hopeless and invisible. Starbucks was his answer to that pain. It was his way of saying, "I will build a company where no one feels like my father did." That belief became his compass. Every benefit, every partner program, every store designed to feel safe and warm, all of it came from that single childhood memory. By 2017, Howard had led Starbucks through poverty, rejection, expansion crisis, and rebirth. He had turned coffee into culture. And now, after decades of building, he felt it was time to pass the torch. He stepped down as CEO again. This time, not out of exhaustion or crisis, but fulfillment. He said, "It's time for a new generation to lead. But I'm not leaving. I'm just changing my role." He handed leadership to Kevin Johnson, a longtime board member and a man he trusted deeply. Yet retirement for Howard didn't mean retreat. He turned his energy toward causes that mattered to him: veterans, refugees, racial equity, education, and what he called the unfinished promise of the American dream. He launched initiatives to hire 1,000 military veterans, provide college education for Starbucks partners, and support communities often left behind. "We are not in business just to make money," he said. "We are in business to elevate humanity." In 2019, Howard even considered running for president of the United States. Many people were surprised, but for him, it made perfect sense. He wasn't chasing power, he was chasing purpose. If a poor kid from the projects can build something that touches the world, he said, maybe I can use that experience to help fix bigger things. Though he eventually stepped away from the race, his message remained clear. Leadership is service, not status. Today, Howard Schultz is no longer at the helm of Starbucks, but his fingerprints are everywhere, in every smile from a barista, in every name written on a cup, in every conversation that begins with a sip of coffee and turns into something more. Starbucks still calls its employees partners. It still invests in community programs and sustainability. And it still carries that quiet heartbeat of belonging that Howard imagined decades ago in Milan, standing in front of a small espresso bar. If you walk into a Starbucks today, you'll still feel it, that invisible warmth. Maybe you'll see a student typing out her future, or a couple laughing on their first date, or an old man reading his newspaper, savoring a simple moment of peace. That's not a coincidence. That's culture. Howard built something rare, a company that made billions without losing its soul. When asked what success means to him now, he once said, Success is not about how much you own, but how many people you uplift. He never wanted to be remembered as a businessman. He wanted to be remembered as a builder of trust, of community, of humanity. And maybe that's what makes his story timeless. It's not about coffee. It's about courage. The courage to dream when the world says you can't. Howard was laughed at 217 times before someone finally said yes. He was told Americans would never pay $3 for coffee, that connection doesn't scale, that business and kindness don't mix. He proved them all wrong. He showed that rejection is not the end. It's the beginning. That pain can be the seed of purpose. That you can build something huge and still make it human. Howard Schultz's journey is not just a business story. It's a life story. A story about turning suffering into service, rejection into resilience, and coffee into connection. And maybe if you look closer, it's also a mirror. A reminder that every one of us has something inside worth building no matter where we start. So if you're listening to this and you feel small, unseen, or unsure, remember Howard. Remember the boy from Brooklyn who had nothing but a dream and a reason not to give up, because your dream matters too. Don't wait for the world to clap. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Start with what you have where you are right now. Maybe your version of Starbucks isn't a coffee shop. Maybe it's a book, a project, a business, or a purpose only you can see. Whatever it is, believe in it even when no one else does. Because as Howard once said, dream more than others think practical, care more than others think, expect more than others think possible, and don't be afraid to be the only one who believes. If this story inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that dreams can start anywhere, even from nothing. Let Howard's journey be the spark for another person's belief. And if you enjoy learning English through real stories that move your heart and sharpen your mind, hit subscribe to English Avenue today. New stories, new lessons, new hope, every single week.